I actually just got back from a library sale this morning, so I have more books. We'll be going by size, starting with Loeb Cicero, volume 10 of 28, I think. This was actually at a local bookstore, a local antiquarian bookstore even, and they had it out on their $5 shelf. I know that's good for this kind of book, so I figured might as well get it. I'm not at present a Loeb collector or a big Cicero reader, but either that'll change or I'll sell this. This is a copy of George Eliot's Silas Marner, once a birthday gift to a dentist. I have not read much George Eliot. It's actually more likely my wife will get to this before I do. I know she is very important in the English literary realism movement, and her two biggest works are Silas Marner and Middlemarch. Next is Markings by Dag Hammarskjöld. I knew nothing about this book when I picked it up, which is props to the cover design. When you see this on the shelf and don't know what it looks like some kind of strange, mysterious object. I originally was attracted to the W.H. Auden contribution as translator and the writer of the foreword. And then you flip through it and you're seeing names like Pascal and Kierkegaard and Eckhart. And if you flip to the right page, it only enhances the vision of this as some kind of neat object. Peace, as when long bitterness has been dissolved by tears, the ground bare, glitter of wide waters in the soft light. Perhaps I'm just betraying my ignorance, but Hammarskjöld was a Swedish foreign affairs figure. He was a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, largely for his work with the United Nations. And this book was found in his apartment and published posthumously, which only makes it all more interesting that these were intensely personal writings. I am looking forward to reading this one. This is a really nice copy of Tales from Shakespeare by Charles and Mary Lamb. Charles Lamb was an important figure in the Romantic movement, I think towards the middle of the movement. And this is a collection of prose rewritings of some of Shakespeare's plays that I think were originally meant to make them more accessible to young readers, but they've kind of become a classic in their own right. I do see copies of this everywhere, but this one is particularly beautiful. It has this like soft leather binding that I see on a lot of books, but not always in the best condition. This edition is from 1953, which explains why it's still kind of in good shape. This is in less good shape. Coleridge's Essays and Lectures on Shakespeare. This is Everyman's Library, published by J.M. Dent and Sons in 1926. In a lot of ways, this is the perfect follow-up to The Mirror and the Lamp, which I just finished. A large portion of that book focuses around Coleridge's approach to literary criticism and how revealing that can be to the mind of the Romantic writer. I also just generally like Coleridge, so I'm excited to build out my collection of his work. The French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle, also an important figure in the Romantic movement, and this is one of his major works. This is also J.M. Dent in 1906. I didn't realize when I grabbed this because it was on a discount $5 shelf and I just grabbed what looked good, but this is not only one part of a 2-volume set, but it is the second volume. So now I'm left in the position of deciding, do I hold out for the first volume or sell this and buy a different edition or start reading from the middle? We'll see. Holinshed's Chronicle, Everyman's Library. This is an ex-library book that is not in the best condition, but it was $1. There's a couple volumes that we know Shakespeare was looking at and using as sources for his plays. Notably, Thomas North's translation of Plutarch's Lives was the source of a lot of his classical material, and Holinshed's Chronicle was the source of a lot of his English material. So his histories of the kings of England and King Lear and Macbeth all take information from this chronicle, and I think this is just the selections that Shakespeare would have pulled from. I don't know if there's a modern edition you can buy of the whole chronicle. Surrey's Poems, published by Oxford. I'm gonna have to look up his full name. Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, from Oxford in 1964. There's a picture of him. I actually saw this immediately after I bought it in another store with the dust jacket, but that's fine, I guess. When I first saw it, I thought it said Southey's poems, and I'm familiar with Southey as a name associated kind of with the early Romantic movement, but flipping through it, it's very clearly not from that time period. And then I realized I do know Surrey. The Earl of Surrey is credited with the first use, or maybe the first major use, of English blank verse in his translation of the Aeneid. And with that word, with all his force a dart, he launched then into that crooked womb, which trembling stack and shook within the side, wherewith the caves gan hollowly resound. I don't think Surrey is looked at today as like a great poet, and I'm not even sure the extent of his influence in using blank verse. When Milton is writing Paradise Lost, his preface makes it seem clear that he's not aware of any other poems that have been done in that style. Nonetheless, this is a cool find just for curiosity's sake. And I find most Elizabethan writing, even if it's not from the main figures of the time period, is usually worth reading. We have 3 modern library books. Proust, Swan's Way. This dust jacket is not in good shape. And the book itself has very clearly taken a little damage too. I've been keeping an eye out for Proust, and I'm pretty sure this is the first book, which is great. The Divine Comedy. In the modern library, no dust jacket. From 1932. I have copies of The Divine Comedy, nice illustrated ones with the Duret illustrations, but I find these are good books to gift to people who are like semi-interested in books or who may not have a nice copy of it. And also I don't know which translations I like yet, so maybe I'll keep this one. The Life of Samuel Johnson by Boswell. I actually don't know much about this book. I know it is kind of a classic of the time. I know a little bit about Samuel Johnson as a critic and a figure like towards the end of the Augustan era. And this one's in really good shape under the dust jacket. Classics of Greek Literature. I didn't look at this too closely. This was from the library sale today, and I just grabbed it as we were headed to check out. It looks like it was intended as a student copy, but it's actually really cool because all the translations are old translations. Its Homer is the Alexander Pope. There's a fragment of Sappho translated by Dante Gabriele Rossetti. Somewhere in here there was also Andrew Lang. Thomas More. It's actually pretty wide spanning. It has poetry, drama, history, philosophy, even oratory and satire from all the big names. From 1964, edited by Harry Wedek. The I Ching. This is in the Princeton Bollingen series. It's really pretty under the dust cover. I admit to not knowing very much about the I Ching. I know it is a very old Chinese religious text. I know it's important to certain figures like Carl Jung and that it's related to like divination, but beyond that, I don't know very much. However, anything that gets me interested in or reading more world literature, stepping outside of Europe and America, I'm interested in and will buy. Robert Louth by Brian Hepworth. It is in the Twain English Authors series. I think I've seen one of these before on Thomas More, but I'm not sure. The logo looks familiar. Robert Louth also was a figure that came up in The Mirror and the Lamp. He was an important precursor to the Romantic movement who said that we should study the sacred Hebrew writings, the Bible, as poetry. And we should hold it up as a standard for poetry next to the great classical works. The Bible should be up there next to Homer. And as I understand it, at the time, that was kind of a crazy idea. Not because they didn't like the Bible in the 18th century, but because of the hold that classical antiquity had on the poets and the authors and the standards for what makes good art. In some of my recent reading, an interesting thought I've come across is the idea that the Bible is kind of the source of free verse poetry. And that's because figures in the 18th and 19th century who are looking for different forms of expression, most prominently William Blake and Walt Whitman, but others like Christopher Smart or James McPherson, if they are looking for an alternative way to write poetry, A lot of them end up turning to the English Bible, whose language and rhythms have so much affected and changed the English language that they can suffice as a form to build poetry from. But to a large degree, it started with this guy, Robert Louth. Of the figures who would have read Louth: William Blake, William Collins, Thomas Gray, Christopher Smart, Joseph Spence, Joseph Warton, and Thomas Warton, many of whom I recognize as important figures leading up to and kicking off the Romantic movement. This is the fella. I will say this is the only book in the stack that I actually ordered specifically, rather than found in the wild somewhere for cheap. This was from the library sale today, Prose and Poetry of Rainer Maria Rilke from Continuum's German library series. I have a couple of these. I like these because they often have bilingual texts, especially with poetry. This copy is not great. There's a set of pages where there's no margin. It's printed all the way up to the edge and just cut off there. I don't know if they actually cut off any of the letters. It looks like it might be right on the edge. Rilke is great. I've been wanting to read more of him. It's not for want of his work. I have the second volume of the new poems. I have the Duino Elegies and Sonnets to Orpheus. I have his letters to a young poet. He's just a little bit later than the figures that I've been reading recently, but he's wonderful. Every time I hear a selection of his work, it's mind-blowing. Euripides Volume 5 by Green and Lattimore. I have one of these already. I think I have one for Sophocles. I see these everywhere, so if they're under like $1, I'll grab them. I'm not sure what translator or edition I want long-term for the Greek tragedies. Sometime in the future, I'll probably do a deep dive into the different options and see which one I like the most. Fearful Symmetry by Northrop Frye. This is a very important study into the poetry of William Blake. I haven't read much scholarship of Blake. I liked Blake so much first picking him up that I really wanted to get a sense of what his poetry is like without relying on other sources to tell me how to read it. And I've gotten a good way through his work and am now at a point where I feel good about buying things like this. Spenser and Literary Pictorialism. This is another book of scholarship by John Bender, published by Princeton Press. It's not as pretty under the dust jacket as the other Princeton book. This was at a thrift store in San Francisco. It actually had a lot of scholarship works. There was another book that was a study of Baudelaire and Nietzsche and ideas of decadence. Interesting, but it kind of looked way too dense and niche for my tastes currently. The other book there was, it looked like a typewriter written thesis draft on the figure of Johann Winckelmann as he appears fictionalized in various works of German literature, which is also way too niche for me at this point. I recognize a lot of the figures it mentions, a lot of the authors in there, but haven't read their works extensively and did not really want to pick that up. This feels decent because it's small in scope. It is on Edmund Spenser, who I'm hoping to read sometime soon. And most importantly, it is focused on the actual forms and tools of his poems, literary devices that he uses, and all of that seems valuable to me, so this beats out the other two books. Last book, The Collected Works of Isaac Rosenberg. This was at a used bookstore where it actually was the cheapest book in their poetry shelf. And that surprised me because it's a thick volume. It's a collected works. I didn't know anything about Isaac Rosenberg at the time. I've looked him up since, and he was one of the World War I poets. And specifically, he was one of the ones who died in action. Relatively young, so he had a short career, which is why you can fit all of his works into one volume. Not even just poetry and prose works, but letters, paintings, drawings, all of those fit in here. Flipping through this book in the store, I knew kind of instantly that I had to get it. The poems on every page felt worth reading. He feels like something of a kindred spirit, at least in regards to what he finds beautiful. This is from a fragment of a poem. Power that impels, pulse of the void working to my vain grappling fingers, like the grave star drawing our gazes forlorn, will kiss the sister star that is my soul. So I, a visible star, would penetrate the vast, the unimaginable chasms and abysses, to reach the fountain star that hides the soul of thee. The poet's dead soul, whose flung word lights the world, the struck music that panic whirls the world, the hills decay and pass to blossoms of fire. In their slow dust, God kneads his changing forms. Sculptor of infinite dreams, we thank our dreamer. I looked this up since. This volume isn't hard to get or anything, but this is a treasure to me. And that's everything. I try not to buy a lot of books, but I know I will, so I'm sure I'll be back with another haul